Hi and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown Extra Time. My name's Martin Murphy, I'm your host, and I'm joined as ever by James and Alan. Alan, how are you?
Yeah, all good, all good. Looking forward to Saturday. It's been a very, very long international break.
It's always great to get back to the Celtic matches. And what about you, James?
Same. Other than watching the debacle of U.S. politics and having, just two outstanding candidates to select from, maybe a 0.5 over a 0. Clear. The choice is clear, but we're not exactly stupefied by the options here. But
Absolutely. I get a lot of information from Jon Stewart. It's infinitely more entertaining, I would suggest. But
absolutely.
So this week again, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive as we do on the Extra Time show. We're going to be looking at our opposition, relegation haunted Hearts, who'll be visiting Paradise at the weekend. Alan, if I could maybe start off with your thoughts on Hearts at the moment. I mean, historically, they don't have a good record visiting us. They've had one victory since 2007, which sadly was last season. It made Santa Claus sad. Fortunately, he come back with a trophy at the end of the season. But they've had a terrible start to the season, as everybody knows. No victories in 7, in all competitions. Face value, they don't seem to present much of a threat. Just wondered on your own thoughts, Alan, about their start to the season and if they could cause us any problems.
Yeah, listen, and by the way, you sidestepped that one. It wasn't Hearts that made Santa cry, Martin. It was you booing him that made him cry. Let's be honest about this.
I was down getting a Bovril at the time. I was horrified.
What you choose to throw at Santa's not my concern, but I think a Bovril's a bit harsh. These are nuclear temperature. These
I was
Bovrils.
a bad boy that Christmas. I didn't do so well.
Now listen, so we kind of covered this a little bit on Tuesday in terms of covering where they have gone wrong this season, and a lot of it's to do with Naismith's door, frankly, because they do have a talented squad. I wouldn't be minded not to get overly giddy in terms of how this may play out, because if you look at they're probably arguably the two best performances. They've been away in I think in Czechia. I think it was Victoria Pilsen they played, and they conceded a goal in like maybe the 96th minute or something ridiculous like that to lose 1-0. But hitherto in that game, they'd set up with their three at the back, wing backs, which it doesn't look very fluent, but it was certainly difficult to break down. And although they didn't have the best of that game, they nearly came away with a 0-0. And I think we'll see that template applied at Celtic Park on Saturday. It's what they played. They played three at the back when they got that 2-0 win there last season. So I think, they actually, the other good performance they had was, of course, at home to the Rangers on the opening day of the season, where they had the better of that game in another 0-0 draw. Now, they played four at the back in that match, but they created the better of the chances in it. So, but I think we'll see. So I guess what I'm saying is they have kind of stood up in the bigger games, and I think because Naismith seems to be a little bit fixated at making them defensively solid, to the detriment of the absolute dearth of creativity in front of that. This is a game where he can actually indulge his defensive outlook, and all the Hearts fans will be no doubt supportive of that. So I'm not sure it's going to be, they're not being hapless Hearts. They've been dysfunctional. They've been creatively moribund, but they've not been a disaster in terms of defensively. Their stats, underlying numbers, are actually not as bad as their league position, which is the reverse of last season, where their underlying numbers were okay, but the results were very good. So we've seen a sort of normalisation a little bit there. Regression to the mean, as we sometimes say. So yeah, long story short, I think they'll do similar to what they did last season in terms of the way they set up. But bear in mind, one of the reasons that they were so successful last season was Celtic had Louis Palmer and Mikey Johnson on the wings, giving two of the most horrendous wing performances I have ever seen in my life at the same time on the same pitch. And I think certainly one of them got hiked at half time. We didn't have Fatati picking up his little pockets of space in that game. Carter Vickers was in the middle of his kind of, is he injured, is he fit period. I think Alistair Johnson went off at half time in that game. I'm not making excuses. There were factors in that as well. So, and then they scored a worldy free kick from like 50 yards and just about into the postage stamp, all that. So,
a dodgy free kick was awarded.
Oh yeah, all that. So I'm not. We'll get into that later. But I'm not pessimistic by any means. But I just think I'm not getting carried away by their form in terms of their results as regards how they'll set up and try to be difficult to beat on Saturday, which I think this was how they'll approach it.
I mean, one aspect really that struck me about Hearts this season, it reminds me of Ranieri, the Tinker Man, obviously without the ability for their manager, but the amount of tweaks that the guys made to a team where I think it was 9 new signings that they made, some on the face of it pretty good creative players, and he seems to be trying something different every other game, or in fact every game, which doesn't seem to lend itself to perhaps limited players getting in a system and getting the results that they would hope for. James, what's your take on Hearts?
So I agree with Alan on the overall picture. The composition of how they're being similar to how they've been is interesting. So if you break down how they're creating chances, Alan rightly points out that they've seemingly been focusing more on being solid defensively, but at a massive cost in creating chances from open play. And I want to stress how horrific they've been in that regard, meaning that, so if you go back through, really the last 7-8 seasons, and you look at all of the clubs that have been in the Premiership and look at, including Hamilton, I'm talking about all of the clubs, and you look at how they performed in the Premiership, Hearts so far in their first 4 games are creating a lower amount of chances as measured by XG from open play than any of those teams did over a full season. Okay, so yes, it's only 4 games, but that just tells you how bad they've been in those 4 games. I mean, they're creating almost nothing. Meaning that they're within the neyborhood of what we've been conceding from open play, which we've talked about already at the beginning of the season. Of right in the neighborhood of peak Ange ball when other teams almost didn't get across the halfway line. So that's Hearts only on the attacking side with, I would argue probably the third best, pretty clearly, I think the third best squad as far as talent level. Aberdeen's probably within the neighborhood of them, but I think Hearts would edge them out in just a pure like talent, not necessarily how they're fitting together and being clearly not being utilized. So the other side of that is it's not because they're not taking shots, and this goes back to what my criticism was of and has been of Shanklin, is that their average XG per shot in open play is about 0.05. Okay. That is like a pot shot from 22, 23 yards level of your average chance. So, when your average chance is crap, that means that half of your shots are like crap minus. Okay. So, I mean, you're talking about just horrible chances that they've been creating from open play. Now, the flip side of that, and this is what's, I think, the big theoretical risk going into the weekend. We have not conceded a set play goal yet. Only 4 games. They've been doing a good job from set play, from set pieces. So they've been creating chances. And, normally when you get teams that are, and again, we try to be balanced here. So I don't know if they have a set piece coach. I don't know if Naismith's in charge of what's going on with their set pieces, but they look like they might have their act together on set pieces a little bit. And because we haven't really been stress tested on that to any significant degree, that could be an area of vulnerability if they get the ball far enough ahead to actually get a set piece within the realm of our box, that type of thing. So I think that's now the other part of this is, can they stay this horrible from open play? I mean, it's almost impossible. They have to almost by accident get better, because they do have some good players that we talked about to a greater extent on Tuesday. So, it's one of my paranoia for the game was if they do have a bounce back, like their mean reversion in open play all of a sudden starts to unfold against us. I suspect that won't be the case, but that would be the paranoid view of what could happen. And as I said, that and set pieces. But the flip side of that is that I mean, I haven't seen the latest on whether Clark's fit, but I mean, Craig Gordon is like, a potted plant at this point as far as coming off his line. And he was never very good in that regard. So he's very vulnerable. So I don't think they necessarily have that much of an advantage over us relative to set pieces. It's just from an attacking perspective, they'll probably threaten us in that regard if they're able to get them. But I just as likely could see us, scoring against them and creating good chances because of, various issues, including their keeper being quite poor in that regard.
Some really interesting points there that I could pick up a little bit on. I watched Hearts play Motherwell, and I was really struck by the chaos in the Hearts defence every time Motherwell delivered dead balls. That was quite something for me. It looked incredibly vulnerable. And the point that you made, James, about Hearts attack, that was very much the case. Even that game last season that we were, now we can laugh. Now that the league title's won. But was it the second goal? I think maybe the first goal, the opening goal, was actually Shankland from a corner. And they still used the same tactic. And guess what? It'll be against our left-hand side and our kind of small left back. Shankland tends to peel away for the crosses coming in, and try and either get a ball across goal or try and hit the target. A bit like yourself, James, there's that concern, only a little bit, I suppose, of a Scud missile type Shankland effort. Among the many hundreds of efforts that he tries, one of them's got to hit the back of the net. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable just how confident I feel at the moment. Although I did feel the same way before the Glasgow Derby. So hopefully this is the this is the new normal. Would you like to come in again, Alan?
Yeah, just I think what will be interesting from a Celtic point of view. And by the way, your observation about Motherwell is spot on, because they're probably the premier team in the league in terms of set piece organisation. So the good spot in that on that one. Yeah, I mean that was a game where it looked like they Danda and Spittle both played, and both got sort of hooked relatively early. He said some odd things about those players, but really it's up to Naismith presumably when he bought them, he had a vision as to where they were going to play. They both played as number 10s. I think he's asking them to play a bit deeper. So it just all looks a bit dysfunctional, really. For me, though, what will be interesting will to see how will Celtic team respond. Let's say if we're not a goal up in 10 minutes, if we're not 2-0 up in 40 minutes, how will Celtic respond? Will we stay patient? I suspect we will. I think again the overriding feeling I get from this current Celtic team, this current incarnation under Brendan Rodgers, is of being very calm, very confident, very organised, very sort of sure about what they're doing. So I don't think that will be an issue, but that will be an interesting challenge, because I think this is a good game actually. This is a good game to have before playing Slovan Bratislava,
Sure,
because
absolutely.
that game will be one where there will be many little tricks and little feints that their manager will put in to make things difficult for Celtic. And this is playing against a competent set of professionals who will be probably playing relatively defensively is a really good kind of warm up for that Champions League game.
With that in mind, as all fans will be aware, Alistair Johnson coming back, some Yankee giving him a good old kicking, I think. But in all honesty, with these international games, really always a concern when players are travelling long distances. AJ seems like a hamstring injury, a knock that they don't seem too concerned about. But you would think maybe they won't play him against Hearts at the weekend, keep him for the European game. Alan, if I could come to you first of all, I mean, how important is AJ to the way Celtic have started the season, and how big a loss could he be?
Yeah, so I mean, it would be a concern if he didn't play. So I think this season he's been particularly his form has been particularly good. There's talk that he's potentially going to get offered a new contract, etc. So I did a piece on him really looking, and I wonder what to do is because Johnson's had one full season, which is last season, and I wanted to compare him sort of in the spirit of benchmarking him with Josip Juranovic's had one full season, which was the 21-22 season. And I've also added in Ralston. Ralston in 21-22 more or less had a full season. I think he appeared in the equivalent of like 43 matches. He had 3,800 minutes. So it was a significant period of time. So those caveats are important. So we're comparing Ralston 21-22, Juranovic 21-22, Johnson 23-24. Juranovic did play at least 17 games he started in that season at left back, so we need
Yes.
to acknowledge that fact. So another reason for bringing this up really is we talk about frameworks, we talk about benchmarking. We use these terms almost every week, and this is really what I want to do is bring to life. What does that actually mean? So you're a Celtic fullback. There are certain skills and attributes that you need and that are useful to basically compare Celtic fullbacks with each other. Because comparing Alistair Johnston with the Hearts right back or the Motherwell right back is pretty fruitless given the nature of dominance that Celtic have in the league. So comparing Celtic players with each other is really what I set out to do with capturing my own data. So anyway, long story short, then. So when we talk about benchmarking, and we talk about framework. What does framework mean? It means coming up with data points which are relevant to the position that you are trying to evaluate. So I've got a number of ones here, which I'll try and rush through quite quickly. If you want to see all the graphs, they're on a Celtic Way article, but I added Ralston since then, so they weren't on the original article. That was Juranovic and Johnson. So we start off with defending. So I usually use two very heavily aggregated metrics. Although it's like these are only two data points, they're actually the constituents of many data points. So virtually every defensive action you could think of, tackling, heading, in terms of aerial duels, interceptions, fouling, anything like that, anything you would tag as being belonging to the family of a defensive action goes into these two metrics. So although it is only two data points, they actually encompass the spirit of nearly all of the defensive on-ball activity. And one of them basically looks at, how successful was that defensive action. That's really just comes down to the case of, if you go up for a header, did you actually win the header? So that's the basic way of analysing sort of dual success. And then the second component to it is really looking at the outcome from the defensive action in terms of who actually got possession of the ball after it. So you might win a header, but then if the ball goes to the opposition team, you've won the header, but you've actually, you haven't won possession back. The possession's gone to the other team. So what you're looking for ideally is a defender who wins all their challenges and wins the ball back at the same time. And this is one of the issues that we had with Scales last season, where he might win a lot of headers, but it's kind of random what then happens to the ball because it's all done in a chaotic way, as opposed to Carter Vickers, who's very methodical, manoeuvres players out the way, wins challenges, but also secures the ball as well. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to tease out here. But anyway, long story short, if we look at defensive activity, Alistair Johnston is a bit of a phenomenon in that if you think about Celtic fullbacks of the last sort of 10 years, I think we'd probably all agree, which one was the most defensively sound. It would be Michael Lustig, because Michael Lustig was essentially a player that could play in a back three, maybe even a back two, And 6'2", he was very much a defender first, and his defensive numbers were a lot better than, for example, a Kieran Tierney, whose main attributes to the team were in driving the team forward, running at pace with the ball up the wing, overlapping the full-back, banging in crosses. Lustig was tended to be more of a natural defender. Alistair Johnston's profile in terms of his defending, he profiles very much like Michael Lustig. That's fantastic. Whereas Juranovic and Ralston profile like a typical fullback, not so strong defensively, don't win so many possessions back. So, for example, both Juranovic and Ralston win the ball back in 64% of their duels, whereas with Johnston it's 70%. So you've got quite a difference there. Then we move on to the next sort of key component, which is ball progression. So ball progression, I'm looking at two things. I'm looking at pack passing. That's getting the ball forward through the lines. It's taking your opponents out the game through forward passing, and then ball carry. So that's moving the ball at least 10 yards inside the opposition half. On this one, again, Johnston has by far the best packing score. He averages about 68. We'll do a piece on packing where that sounds like a bit of a sort of abstract number, but it does reflect the number of opponents you're taking out of the game. So it's not 60 opponents you're taking out of the game, because different opponents get different scores depending on where they play. So if you take a defender out of the game, you get more points than if you take a midfielder out of the game. And it's adding all those things up that you get to that 68. Whereas with Juranovic, his score is like 50, and with Ralston, it's 53. So again, actually, Ralston scores better on ball progression. They're all similar-ish on ball carries. Juranovic probably the better with the ball at his feet. Johnston doesn't tend to run with the ball at his feet. But again, in terms of passing the ball forward, Johnston has a clear advantage. Then we move forward again and think, well, Celtic want their fullbacks to create. And it's not, and by create, we're looking at two different things here. First is actually just raw chances, actually providing chances for others. So that's looking at the number of chances they create in open play, which is a pass leading to a shot, and then the expected goal value of that chance, which is referred to as expected assists or XA. So think about that as quality, which is the XA value, and quantity, the volume of chances being created. So very important, I feel, for these measurements that you try and capture both quality and quantity. And once again, Johnston has a clear advantage over the other two. In fact, his XA per chance is 2.9, which is nearly double the quality of the chances that Juranovic provided. Now, these are from open play. Juranovic did take set pieces on occasion. They're not included here. I'm only looking at open play. And Ralston's kind of in the middle, 0.22. And in terms of volume, again, Johnston has slightly higher volume of chances he's creating, as well as better quality. Then I look at, getting the ball into dangerous areas. So that's two things. One is cross success, and second is getting the ball into the danger zone. So completing a pass into the box where the ball ends up with somebody's head or feet or whatever, central to the goal, but inside the box. That's called the danger zone. And once again, Johnston is a clear favourite here. He's successful with his 21% of his crosses. Juranovic was 17, Ralston was 13. Again, a clear advantage. And then in terms of danger zone passes, Johnston has a slight advantage, 0.92 per game. Juranovic is 0.87, Ralston 0.77. So you look at all those things. Johnston has a clear advantage in virtually all of them, apart from ball progression at feet, which is a relatively low volume activity. And then finally, I looked at the StatsBomb pressing data, and once again, Johnston presses about 4 times a game more than the other two. He regains the ball back slightly less. So if you looked at it as a percentage, again, that's a volume stat. If you want to look at quality, it would be the percentage of pressures that result in you regaining the ball back. And Johnston's regain volume is actually a lesser percentage than Juranovic, which suggests that Juranovic didn't press as much, but when he did, he was more maybe made better decisions as to when to do it, because he was winning the ball back more often. It's the same with counter pressures. Counter pressures, when you lose the ball and you try and win it back within 5 seconds. Johnston has a higher volume, but probably lesser percentage of success in terms of a quality metric. So you could argue Johnston, maybe he gives you a lot of pressing volume, maybe not as high on pressing quality, but in terms of basic defending, he's Michael Lustig levels of a defender, but he's giving you better creativity than Juranovic and Ralston, and he's giving you better ball progression. So, long story short, incredibly valuable player for Celtic.
Really interesting, Alan. And I noticed that you didn't mention John Joe Kenny at any point during that analysis. We wait with bated breath.
Yeah. So just a reminder there, because we do like to trigger people in such a way that we get more clicks and we have to spend days fielding people sending vicious abuse because of a football opinion they didn't like. So thank you for setting me up. Awesome. John Joe Kenny. Yeah, I did a piece on him, which basically showed that him and Ralston were kind of the same, but people hated that. They didn't want to hear that. Ralston's Raldo, Ralstonino, and all that. And John Joe Kenny is everything that we remember going bad in 2020. But people's minds are, they don't like that sort of stuff. But anyway, let's not go any deeper into that.
So James, I wondered what your take on it was in terms of the fullback situation with AJ. Obviously, he's had a great start to the season. Do you agree with Alan in terms of the analysis he gave with Ralston kind of, as a reasonable able deputy, certainly in the domestic football to come in and where do you stand with Juranovic, sorry, and Ralston, AJ? What's your own views?
Yes, I probably agree with 95% of what Alan laid out there. So I'm not going to be redundant and just echo what he adeptly went through. So I'm going to point out what I think can add to the profile that he just laid out. And it's not necessarily to disagree. It's just to maybe provide a little more context. So I think that the one aspect of, and it fits with what Alan laid out, the one aspect where Johnston probably has a marginal, there's that word again, I get in trouble when I throw these words out, marginal demerit, and this is statistically, I'm not saying this is necessarily inherent, is that his fouling has been a little bit more prominent, and he's done it more frequently in bad locations. So that's one of the things that you pick up with StatsBomb data is, a fullback that gets beat maybe and brings an attacker down 20 yards at a dangerous angle for a dangerous free kick is going to get dinged for that more in StatsBomb, for example, than if they get a yellow card for dragging a winger down who beats them at the midway line, which, both of those are kind of frequent interactions that take place in the normal course of play, where if a defender is going to get beat, that's kind of two contextual aspects of it. So again, on the margin, Johnston has been a little bit more and that fits with what Alan's laying out. So I've viewed Johnston when we signed him and subsequent, I haven't really seen anything that changes my view of him, is that he's a bit of a tweener. And I don't mean that in a negative way, meaning that he is very kind of, and this is how Canada uses him primarily, as a right center back and a back three. Like I think that might be his best role from an overall profile perspective, which as he aged probably was Lustig's role. And that was really how, as Alan said, that's how Rodgers, we technically had a back four, but the way it would set up, I think, Alan, you correct me if I'm wrong, it was more like a 3-5-2 or something we ended up with.
In transition, yeah. Tierney would bomb on and everyone would shuffle over slightly. And Lustig would tuck in, because Lustig also had great long passing, by the way.
He was a great pack passer too. Yeah. So he was excellent deep passer. So I see him as probably a right center back as his best profile, but he's athletic enough and he's got enough pace that he's functional as a right back, particularly domestically, and probably at a Europa League level, like kind of the, I would say Bratislava level, like that tier of opposition that we're going to face and we face regularly. Rangers probably fit into that tier. Where I have more of an issue with them at right back is when we're playing against teams that have actual pace on the wings and skill combined. And I think that's where even a guy like Juranovic, whose pace was of that higher gear, if you have that positional issue and you get blown by one of these attacking, wingers that they'll face 1v1, that's where I think Johnston's gotten into a little bit more trouble even under Ange. So that's kind of the broader context. And I think this kind of aggressiveness and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you don't quite have the quickness and the pace on a 1v1, and you tend to be a little bit more aggressive in your way of defending, that can lead to more fouling. So, Alan,
would
you want to jump in?
would you like to come in?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to really back up your point about the fouling. It's a good spot. So in terms of my defensive metrics, it's wrapped up inside those defensive action success rate numbers. But the thing that echoes in the data that I went through was when I talked about pressing decision making. So with Johnson, you get a bigger volume. He's a very athletic guy. You get a higher volume of pressing, but a lower proportion of regains resulting from it, and that speaks to that sort of. So one of the projects that James and I think hopefully are going to do sometime this season is build an IQ model for each position, which will focus only on attributes and metrics which give insight into decision making and on field intelligence. So one of those could be, and I suspect there'll be a high correlation between IQ metrics and quality metrics, as in, providing high quality passes for high quality chances is indicative of good decision making. Similarly, not winning the ball back when committing to the press is probably the inverse of that. It's maybe indicative of not great decision making. What James is talking about there, fouling in dangerous areas, is indicative of poor decision making, low IQ. So all I want to say is I think I completely agree with you. There are hints of that in what I've said. And I think that sort of IQ model is going to be fascinating in terms of just looking at players through that lens.
Yeah.
Sorry, James, do go
well,
ahead.
no, I'm going to say this. I know Alan. I shouldn't say I know. I'm 99% sure Alan's going to agree with this, but I don't want to pretend as if I'm speaking for him. But the conclusion is not that Johnson is an unintelligent player. I think what Alan is saying is that this is a context for the type of thing that we can look at as part of an ensemble of indicators that could be a trigger. My view is, without having gone into that, as Alan said, that's an aspirational thing that we're hoping to nail down a little better in the coming months. Is I think it's more of a physical issue, meaning that I think because he's not quite as quick. And when he's put out on that island, like a fullback is more so than a center back, that when he is put in that, like a Matondo is quicker and faster than him. I mean, it's not very technical, but, Matondo smokes people that are quicker and faster and then doesn't do much with the ball, but than Johnson. So that's the type of matchup that when he's in those kind of 1v1s, I think he's more inclined to foul, not because he's, not smart in his decision making necessarily, but because it gets a little chaotic and hectic. And I think because he tries to be, I think his natural playing style is one of a physical person. He's a robust player. Like, he's not afraid of contact. That's kind of his game. I think that kind of manifests in that higher fouling rate. The positional part of it could be IQ, meaning that you shouldn't be doing that in the box or on the edge of the box. Obviously is different than if you're doing it 50 yards away from goal. The other thing I'll throw out there, and this is a marginal thing again, and mostly domestically, is I think that Ralston is, I do think Ralston offers value in attacking set pieces. That's material. And we've seen that, not irregularly when he plays and when he's used that way. It drove me nuts last season when I'd see him at times as he's like the deep cover in corners. When Greg Taylor's like up there blocking the keeper, I'm like, what the, like Ralston, I think objectively is one of our better attacking players when it comes to heading the ball off of set pieces. So that's on the margin. He might only get a couple of those a season, even if he played full time. But I just thought I'd mention it because I'm a big Ralston mark and I do love him as a player. So I overall, I don't think they're in the same neighborhood as far as overall quality. I do think Ralston, because he has many of the same kind of profile deficiencies as far as pace and quickness. Only he's, as Alan said, more of a traditional right back, although I think
Yep.
he could play right center back, particularly domestically. Like I think if he played for, you know, a Hearts, for example, that were playing three at the back consistently, I think he could be a quality right center back in Scotland for, you know, kind of a top six team. So yeah, I think overall, like I said, I agree with Alan's comments and profiles of Johnson. The last thing I'll say is I think Johnson's been getting better in his attacking output, and that as he's been getting, particularly under Rodgers, as Rodgers has been more so, you know, looking for this more overlapping fullback, or at least the personnel have allowed it as we've gotten better wing play. Maybe that's a better way to put it rather than a focus. I think he's been getting better at that. And so his first season under Ange, he was good, but, you know, Ralston had a great season and they were kind of in the same neighborhood, kind of, you know, as far as final third productivity. And to his credit, I think Johnson's taken that up a notch, and made himself a really, really quality weapon. And even from deep, like some of his passing is really gotten quite good. So yeah, so I think he would be a big miss if he's not available in Europe in particular. Hearts, less concerned. I think Ralston's, you know, okay enough domestically, particularly against Hearts at home. I wouldn't be too worried. But yeah, Johnson's a solid first pick by a decent distance.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Montake really on Tony. Good enough player in a lot of respects. Certainly good enough for the Scottish League. The season that you mentioned with Ange, great goal scoring record actually, as well as the amount of assists that he made. He's got a lot of heart. He'll never really let you down. And it is, as you say, when we go up a level, when we're playing, Champions League, we see it a little bit in the international scene as well, where he can still put a few nice crosses over and all the rest of it. But defensively, playing against faster players, players that can control the ball quickly, quicker feet, trying to pull him out of position, he can throw himself in on occasion. So I think absolutely fair. Good backup in a lot of ways. In the game itself against Hearts, I'll be very interested to see how he performs if indeed he does play. And I'm obviously hoping to see some of the new signings as well. Hopefully making an appearance at some point. Be good if we could blood them a little bit before the Champions League. If I can move on now, some of the biggest news in Scottish football more recently has been to do with VAR. Surprise, surprise. And Willie Collum coming out. There's a new monthly VAR update, which I saw on YouTube, but also Willie appeared on Radio Clyde to discuss VAR. I, for one, think it's definitely a step in the right direction, very welcome. The head's above the parapet, and there's maybe a move towards some transparency and helping people understand the decisions that are made. James, if I could come to you first, what's your own take on Willie Collum's views on VAR and the way it was displayed?
I consumed the full special that's going to be the monthly special on YouTube, and then I probably listened to about half of the Clyde interview, and so I didn't hear comprehensively the discussion on Clyde, but I give what I listened to and watched an A+. I mean, I think I thought Collum was very forthright. I mean, he's obviously got a constituency that he's got to be careful. You know, he is the head of officiating, so he's going to be coming from that perspective. He's not going to, be a rhetorical bomb thrower against his own personnel. But I also thought, I mean, to come out and talk about the educating and calling out, I'll call them staff members. I mean, members of the officiating crew. He was very explicit about that when in his opinion, in his review of some of the calls, he said they were wrong. He talked about the instruction level that's going on with the officials. So that's a level of, transparency I think is great. I thought the one where he went through what happened and there was the audio recording of the foul against St. Johnston, that, there was the controversy as far as the official having kind of made a gesture but didn't blow his whistle, and the official had thought Dessers had fouled, and I thought that was exactly what is needed. It's not going to change everyone. You're still going to have the chaotic, emotional, frenetic responses that occur as the God-given right of fans to do that. But I thought it was excellent in laying out kind of the reality of what they're dealing with, and the protocols that they have to follow, that they're trying to follow, the actual rules. He went over the impact of IFAB and why they can't review. I think it was an Armstrong dive that was rendered to be a yellow card that wasn't. He went through why it was a bad call, how they went to their official and went over why it was a bad call with the official. But as far as VAR goes, it was outside the box, so it couldn't be dealt with. And that's kind of a hard and fast rule. So laying out all of this context, I think, is a great for transparency. It's great for education, from the fan perspective. The one thing I will say, as far as on the bad side, it does draw into question the competency of some of these people, meaning that, like every other profession, you have a range of abilities. And, we've talked about in the past, whether it's training, whether it's unconscious bias, there's a lot of different things. But for example, the first one they went over on that show was, I believe, was the foul of Kyogo, and how they looked at that from any angle and did not award a penalty is nuts. Particularly given the clarification that Collum provided in talking about what the criteria and the protocols are as far as what they're doing. So, to me, that falls under the kind of realm of gross incompetence, right? That's such a vividly clear one. So I'd be curious to see, whether or not there's any actual kind of scoring that they do where you have serial offenders making that kind of horrible call. What do they do with these people? Like, are they still officiating? Because at a certain point, if you're making those kind of errors and then you're being coached as far as, this is bad, and then you keep doing it, then you shouldn't be officiating. Like, this isn't, this isn't a world where everyone has the same skill set, as nice as that would be. So I think that was the part that I found worrying, is that you could have somebody that incompetent to make that kind of mistake, particularly with VAR. Like, live action, you always, you always have some empathy, because it's a tough job. At least I do. I mean, I think officiating across sports is a really tough job, particularly live. But with VAR, to have not fixed that call, it was just remarkable.
You actually picked the one that really surprised me the most as well, James. What I found remarkable was listening to the conversation. Something that I, really welcome. And they're saying, "Oh, the goalkeeper, didn't seem to move towards him." I'm like, "What are you watching?" It was incredible, and I think the point you raise is vitally important. Where, yes, it's great to have the transparency. It's great to hear the conversation, and it's obviously great to know that they're going to be training and practicing and all the rest of it. But at some point or other, there's got to be consequences as well. People can lose their jobs if a team's relegated, don't get into the Champions League, there's less money, etc., etc. So as long as on top of the training, there was almost like a promotion and demotion of officials based on their ability. And the final thing I'll say in it before coming to Alan, I found the one as well in the first game of the season, with Hearts v Rangers, the handball. I certainly was looking for a penalty at the time. I thought they explained it really well, why it wasn't. But as ever, I would hope that any further instances as we go throughout the season are dealt with in exactly the same way. That's their benchmark now. They've explained it. Let's make sure that there's consistency and they stick to these things. Alan?
Yeah. So again, as James said earlier, I agree with nearly everything that he said, so I won't repeat it. I'm generally coruscating about the SFA and its function. and therefore, I have to give credit for this. This is a tremendous initiative, very well done. I thought Collum was very impressive. He's exactly what the sort of person I would want to see in that role. In that he's not a he's not a charming slime ball. He's very factual, forensic, precise in his language, and very forthright, as you said. I think in the way he delivered it, a very good performance I thought from him. And if this is his initiative, he's already done more in 2 months than the SFA have done in 20, 30, 40 years around refereeing. So that is absolutely to be applauded. That you picked up on the Kyogo one, I found that astonishing. So I come back to you were talking there about consequences. So unfortunately, referees can get assigned to games, and maybe they go down to the first division or the second division or whatever if they're making mistakes. There are 2 assigned VAR people in the Premier League, which is Greg Aitken and Andrew Dallas. And the first one was Greg Aitken. Now there are lots of, you might call it circumstantial evidence, and I don't know who Greg Aitken supports, but there's certainly a fair bit of circumstantial evidence that might suggest he favours the Rangers. I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't claim to know either way. But the point is that there's doubt there in people's minds as to where his affiliations are, and when there's doubt, there is a lack of trust, and it's very difficult for people then to trust these people's judgment. So when you see that performance, and I'm talking about the vocal overlay that the VAR official Greg Aitken provided to that Kyogo goal, and you two have rightly said it was astonishing in terms of its. I honestly thought I was listening to Kris Boyd. I thought what they've actually done here is they've picked up Kris Boyd's microphone in the studio. Oh, that's no penalty for me. No way. Oh, no, nothing in that. I genuinely thought this is some Rangers fan talking here, because it's like the conversations you have on Twitter when you play an incident, and then fans of all teams, Celtic, everybody, they basically trick their eyes into not seeing what's in front of them because of the bias of the team that they support. We all do it, right? I don't expect it from the VAR though, and this is a problem. Yeah, and similarly with Andrew Dallas. Andrew Dallas is the other full-time VAR. Andrew Dallas was the one that seemed to struggle to get his set, square, and compass right for the offside Kyogo goal in the derby. And again, you only need to look at Andrew Dallas's family history to understand that there would surely be potential issues with having a Dallas family member, refereeing a Celtic or even a Rangers match. I mean, again, I'm not accusing him of anything specific. There's doubt there, and you're not creating an environment of trust if you're having potentially compromised individuals in these key positions. So I saw the 35-minute SFA show. I thought it was tremendous. I thought the BBC guy Gordon, I don't know his second name, I thought he was
Gordon
excellent.
Duncan.
Gordon Duncan. He probed Collum on the handball assurances that fine, because we were all a bit surprised on the first day of the season, and Collum's been very consistent on this, that yep, that would have been given last season. Let's see the proof in that in terms of as we go through the season that continues not to be awarded as a penalty. So that's fine. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But on the only bit of the Clyde program I saw was the snippet where he was talking about referees and declaring their conflicts of interest, etc. We've had conflicts of interest before, but it doesn't seem to matter. They still seem to get, we still seem to get, people assigned to games that there's clearly a conflict of interest. And, the notion that Scotland sits alone and is utterly unique in world football in being able to solve for the problem of not having people refereeing teams they either love or hate. It's only Scotland, as I understand it, that can't solve for this problem. And if you think about it, the toxicity, the virulent hatred between the top 2 teams in Scotland is arguably unmatched anywhere else in the world because it's cultural. It's not, I'm in Sheffield, and It'd surprise you actually how much Sheffield United fans and Sheffield Wednesday fans hate each other. But for now on 40 years, I've been asking people, why do you hate them so much? And nobody can get, it's just purely tribal. There's no reason for it. There's no socio-economic reason. There's no cultural reason. There's no ethnic reason. It might be geography, different parts of the city, but there's no reason for it. But in Scotland, there is, right? So it is even more imperative that you be seen to be doing the right thing by this. And the way that Scottish football continually dismisses this and comes out with this bullshit about, oh, but they're all good lads, they're all really honest, you're telling me that these people are immune from these biases that we all have. It's nonsense, right? And these things will come out in the heat of the moment. And I refer back to that astonishing commentary from Greg Aitken over the Kyogo incident. That, to me, is an example of unconscious bias consciously being verbalized in that moment. I thought we were listening to Kris Boyd, right? So I don't want to slam Willie Collum, and this is clearly a hill that they're prepared to die on. But I just think it's a nonsense. I think in terms of the credibility of Scottish football, if they cannot solve for this, and the likes of Greece, Turkey, Albania, countries that have all sorts of very, very melting pots of ethnic tensions that can manifest themselves in football matches and different clubs and so forth. If all these countries can solve for this, why can't Scotland? Why do they refuse to budge on this issue? So I agree with James. A+ for that, but there's still a lot of work in front of Willie.
100%. So I was just going to say, and it's also, I think to Willie Collum's credit that he's even attempted to come out here. This Crawford Allen character that was there before him, he only came out once, wasn't it? And it was I think it was the marginal offside at Tynecastle with Kyogo, which we're still not sure if he was on or off, and he came out and was offering all sorts of apologies. So I think that Willie Collum definitely has to be congratulated. But Alan, 100%, it's the first step in a long, long journey here. James, sorry, you were coming in.
Well, no, I was just going to say, this was, we're all kind of echoing that it was a great first step. And I think it seems like Collum's the type of person that's going to follow through with this. I mean, they've already committed to this being a monthly show. So if they follow through with that, and because even if we just look at this from a competence perspective, forget about all the other kind of collateral stuff, or peripheral stuff that Alan rightly brings up, is just a merit-based perspective here. As the months go by, we'll see who more and more has to be corrected, just anecdotally. I mean, you're going to be able to see, okay, well, Collum's calling this guy up again. Aiken's doing this again, or Dallas is doing this again. We're going to know who these people are. That's part of the transparency. And if, with that comes a potential accountability. And not just for the officials, but for Collum eventually, which is, okay, this is the 5th time something like this has happened. What's going on with this guy? Like, what's the plan? That's someone who, like Gordon Duncan, who I would actually have trust in, because I hold him in very high regard. I think he does a very good job and tries to play an actual role of a journalist. I know that's actually, these days that's become, and he does it in a funny way, lightheartedly, but I think he does a good job as far as asking tough questions and being a critical thinker, that kind of thing. So I suspect he'll push Collum at some point in the future if that becomes the issue. And that's what should happen here, because until they do address some of these other structural issues, and again, I get it. Like, these are fine lines where you call into question the integrity of people. And I think there has to be common sense involved as well, as Alan points out, but these are not easy issues, even within the context of the situation in the west of Scotland. So, and even if you take Collum as good faith trying to do something, the idea that he's going to go in there and be a revolutionary and flip everything that's been going on for the last few decades all at once is, I think, naive. So to me, as Alan said, this is a huge deal, I think. and a push in the right direction. So rather than be critical and, tripling down on things that are negative, I think it's, greet it with positivity, say, keep going, hold them accountable in the future, but, more of this, please, I think.
Thanks so much, James. Alan, just prior to rounding things off, did you have anything to add about the direction of the programme for any new subscribers or viewers or listeners?
Yeah, just kind of repeating, not everyone watches every show, and some people might be watching this.
How dare
one
they?
first time. I know, but is that I'm hoping you're getting a sense that we're kind of moving towards in a certain direction with the Huddle Breakdown in terms of becoming more regular and more consistent in our output. 2 podcasts a week, a Tuesday flagship show, and then a Thursday extra time where we can explore details with a bit more space, if you like. But also, that's just the start of it, really. We're in the middle. Well, that's not fair, actually. We're near the end of building out a Substack platform, which will actually bring together not just the podcasts, but written articles from James and myself. So that include all the Celtic by Numbers stuff, which I'll be ported over from my WordPress site into Substack. All the Yorkshire Whistle stuff will be there. James will be starting to do a lot more written work on that site, and maybe less so on Twitter. So we start to see that, and there'll be other new features such as benchmarking reports, game stat packs. We're probably going to expand the Yorkshire Whistler content with some audio bonus editions.
We got some competition now, Alan. Competition's good.
I know. Can't promise to be as slick as Gordon, Duncan, and Willie Collum, of course, but certainly there's a new genre of football show, referee porn, if I can call it that. So so listen, loads of new content.
I'll never get that image out of my head, Alan.
Loads of new content. It will be brought together on a single site. Now, all of the things that I've talked about there, they do come at a cost of sort of time and also professionalism and help from professionals in terms of on our side to make the production and everything as slick and as good as it can be. So there will be some kind of subscription model over some of that, but not there will be things that will be, and key pieces will absolutely be free. That's very important to us. So it's really going to be thinking about people that really want to get into the nitty gritty, want to really consume more of Celtic data analysis, analytics, etc. We'll be able to do that. And as I say, as a result of that, what we're looking to do is really create a community of people that really get this stuff, really into it, really like it, really enjoy it, and we can all learn off each other. So, as I say, announcements will be coming, but that's kind of the direction that we're going. So, thank you, Martin. I'll shut up now.
Thanks so much, Alan. And just a reminder that Alan and James will be joined by Laura, who'll be hosting the edition of Wednesday morning. That'll be going over the Hearts match and also looking at, of course, our European opponents. I'll be back this time next week, hopefully celebrating 2 well-deserved victories, a springboard for the Champions League with a bit of luck. And one final thing, James's outrage, I think, was justified if you didn't watch last week's show, because James contributed some poetry for us. We talked about midfield battles. If you haven't, my friends, go back and listen to that or watch it. It certainly inspired me, and I'm going to leave. This one's for you as well, James, because you inspired myself and also Lawrence from Axom. We went back and we're looking at a bit of Yeats, but I thought I would try something a little bit different. Very short one. Plutarch, who you may be surprised to know isn't Mickey Mouse's dog, but a Greek philosopher, historian, mathematician. And Plutarch said, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." So if anyone's out there like me, new to this data analysis business, it's fantastic. We can start looking into this. discovering things, maybe watching the games in a slightly different way. So thank you, James, for kindling that fire in me.
Oh,
That
you're
is
welcome.
awesome. Yeah, we're having this every week now. We're having Poetry Corner. I like that.
So thanks again, everyone. Hopefully you'll be listening in or watching next week. Take care. Bye-bye.